the nature of business research. What are some of the characteristics of business research? Based on yesterday's lecture and further readings that you have done. Or since we left, you've not opened any book or the slides to refresh your mind as to what we did. What are the features of business research? Number one is what? Is what? Okay. Yeah. Is what? Transdisciplinary in nature. It cuts across disciplinary boundaries. Okay. What other feature is typical of business research? It completes what? The virtuous what? Cycle of what? Theory and practice. And when it comes to knowledge production, how many modes do we have? 3. Mode 1 is what? Theory based. Mode 2 is what? That's more of what? Practice with focus on profitability. Then mode 3 is also practice, but with focus on what? Societal what? Well-being. Okay, so those are the 3 modes. Now, we want to build on that and look at philosophies of management research or business research. What you should note is that every researcher comes to the research table wearing some lens, whether they are aware of it or not. Okay. So as I stand here, I am wearing some lens. You can't see it. But as I write, you can read through my writings and tell the lens that I am wearing. Okay. So the lens that I wear is not by accident. It's deliberately what? Chosen based on my worldview and how I view nature in general and how knowledge is generated and the best way we can generate knowledge. Okay? So at the fundamental level, it is good for every researcher to know the lenses that they are wearing. In fact, it is actually a requirement that you strongly declare the lens that you are wearing, so that when you make your debate, people can see the debate in the light of what? The lenses that you are wearing. Otherwise, they will be looking at your debate using different lenses. And when they apply the wrong lens to your study, they will say that your study does not make sense. But it does make sense if only they will wear the lens that you wore when you were doing your research. And that is at the core of philosophy. Now, so what we are going to do is to define key terms when it comes to research philosophy. Ontology, epistemology, axiology, methodology are the key issues when it comes to research philosophy. Okay. Now, having looked at them, then we would basically go into what we call philosophical perspectives. Other literature will call them philosophical worldviews. Okay. And there are several philosophical worldviews, but we would categorize them into four, namely positivism, realism, interpretivism or constructivism, and then pragmatism. So by the time we go through them, you must be able to tell what your philosophical perspective is or what the lens you are wearing is. Okay? So in most of my writings, I will take a positivist stand. So I'm a positivist. The way I look at things is from a positivist lens. So if you are going to judge me from the positivist lens and not using a pragmatist or an interpretivist lens. Okay. So as we move on and you understand what these imply, then you can also determine where you fall. Okay. So before we go into the philosophies and philosophical assumptions proper, let's take a look at what we call the research onion. So research is like an onion with several layers. And we talk about research taking a systematic approach. So each layer reveals a suite of packages which the researcher must choose with justification in order that they can competently conduct the research. So when you peel one layer, another layer emerges. You peel it, another layer emerges until you get to the inner core. Okay? And that is what we are going to look at. So the first layer, when it comes to research, is the philosophies. And as I indicated, there are several philosophies, but they can be grouped into four major philosophies. So if you take positivism, there are several philosophies, sub-philosophies under positivism. You take realism, there are several philosophies. You take interpretivism, there are several philosophies. And one of them, for instance, I can say is feminism. It's also a philosophy, for instance. Okay. Then we have pragmatism. So these philosophies lay the foundation for determining the perspective from which the researcher approaches the research process. Okay. And I would not want to tell you everything here because we are going to do them immediately after this section. Okay. But just note that first is the philosophy, okay, which will talk about the nature of reality, how knowledge is generated, what constitutes valid knowledge, etc., etc. Then when philosophy is determined, the next layer you move to is the approach. Are you using a deductive approach or an inductive approach? A deductive approach or an inductive approach. A deductive approach, if you start the research by formulating the research problem, crafting hypotheses based on theory, collecting data, interpreting the data to test the theory, and then making conclusions. That becomes a deductive approach. An inductive approach, if the research process begins, first of all, with the data collection process, by establishing patterns. And the patterns, when analyzed, may eventually lead to the generation of theory. That is the inductive approach. We shall look at them in detail soon. Now, when you determine the approach, then the next layer is to determine the strategies. Okay, so we have philosophies, approaches, and what? Strategies. Now, in terms of the strategies, there are several strategies that you will choose from. You can decide that I'll conduct an experiment. It can be a lab experiment, or you are simply administering some drug to some group of people, and then another group of people with similar conditions are not given the drug, and then you compare. So you can do an experiment. Or you can do a survey where you design a questionnaire and collect data from individuals. Okay? Or you can select a particular individual or a particular organization and study that organization in detail. That is what we call a case study. Or it can be an action research where the purpose of the research is to ensure that you come out with some recommendations for dealing with a particular problem. Okay? Or it can be, for instance, a grounded theory, in which case you are dealing with an issue where there is no strong theory that exists, or there is no theory at all. Okay, so if there's no theory in an area, you, the researcher, can dig deep into it and then come out with the theory. So we call that the grounded theory approach. Or it can be ethnography. In an ethnographic study, the researcher immerses him or herself in the research process. So you, the researcher, also becomes a participant in the process, and then whilst you are participating, you are collecting data. So for instance, you often see that sometimes some of the whites, they come and participate in our festivals. They also be dancing, doing whatever. But I tell you, it's research they are doing. They will not tell you they are doing research. After they have gone home, in the thick of the night, they will document their lived, we call it lived experience. Okay. So a situation where the researcher immerses him or herself in the situation so that they can gather information from the process, first-hand information. Okay? They themselves can testify to what happens. Okay? And I often give an example that, so suppose that you want to do a research on, say, the Gambaga witch camp. How are you going to do it? You have to go and be with them. Okay? The best way is to go and be with them and see what happens for yourself. Okay? So live with them for 2 months. Collect data. And then at the end of the day, you can publish the research findings. Okay, so that's what we call ethnography. Okay, then a research may then use archival documents. So you can go to the museum and monument boards, because people still do research these days as far back as using data as far back as 1957, when Ghana gained independence. So they are interested in the historical antecedents. So they go to the archives or they go to the records and just pick old documents, piece them together, and then they can do their research. So when you have chosen the appropriate strategy, then you have choices to make in terms of the methods. Some choices to make in terms of methods. Generally speaking, there are 3 main methods. We have what we call mixed method, quantitative and then qualitative methods, generally speaking, okay, before I come to this one. Quantitative approach, when you collect data that involves numerical facts and what? Figures. So that's quantitative. Qualitative, when data involves text, they involve narratives, historicities, stories, then you are dealing with qualitative data. Then when you combine the qualitative and the quantitative data in the same setting, we call it what? Mixed method. Then in this classification, what the approach that we have chosen to illustrate the onion is to see where to classify them into mono method, mixed methods, and then multi-method. Mono method means you have used one method, either qualitative or what? Quantitative, and not both. Yeah. Then you have mixed methods where you combine quantitative and qualitative. Then you have multi-method where you combine several qualitative methods or techniques with several kinds of quantitative methods and techniques. So, for instance, you can have the situation where the individual is using a quantitative approach when it comes to sampling. So you use probability-based sampling. Then the same individual is also on one part using non-probability based sampling, which are qualitative approaches. And then when it comes to the data collection itself, the individual may use a structured questionnaire, which is a quantitative instrument. At the same time, use an unstructured interview, which is a qualitative what? Technique. So in other words, there are several levels that the researcher combines the qualitative and what? The quantitative. So we say that it's a multi-method approach. Now, when you have made choices regarding the method to use, then the next layer moves into the time horizons. In terms of time horizons, we can classify research into three main categories. First category is cross-sectional dimension. Okay? And data collected from that is called cross-sectional data, where the researcher collects data at a single point in time from a cross-section of individuals, firms, organizations, or objects. So if at the moment, for instance, I pass around a questionnaire to collect data from you now, that becomes cross-sectional because the time is one, that's now, or today, but you are many. So that's a cross-section. Okay. Then we can have data that is collected from the same individual, the same country, or the same entity, or the same object over several years or several periods, time periods. So if I take inflation data for Ghana from 1970 up to 2024, that is time series data. There's only one series that I'm looking at, or one country I'm looking at. Okay, that's Ghana. The country is Ghana. And the data I am collecting covers several time periods, 1970 up to say 2023. So that becomes what we call time series data. Now, apart from time series data, you can also have what we call longitudinal data. Longitudinal data. Longitudinal data is a combination of cross-sectional data and what? Time series data. In other words, the data contains several time dimensions on several individuals, several entities, or several countries, or several objects. Okay? So this same inflation data I told you about, if I collect it for Ghana, Nigeria, Togo, Liberia from 1970 up to date, that becomes what we call longitudinal data, because you have several cross sections, Ghana, Nigeria, Liberia, Togo, and what? Several time periods from 1970 up to what? 2023. That is what we call longitudinal data or panel data. Longitudinal data or panel data, P-A-N-E-L. Okay, so we use them interchangeably. Now, so when you have decided what to do in terms of the time domains of your work, then you look at data collection and analysis techniques and procedures. So the last part is what? Techniques and procedures. How do I collect data? Do I design a questionnaire? Or I just need focus group discussion? So I need an interview guide. Do I use a tape recorder? Do I use camera and take pictures? Or what approach should I use? When you have decided that and you collected the data, then the data analysis. Do I do qualitative analysis or what? Quantitative analysis. Do I use regression analysis? Do I use correlation analysis? Do I use chi-square analysis? Do I use analysis of variance, etc., etc.? You have to make a decision regarding techniques and procedures for what? Collecting and analyzing data. So that, in sum, is the research onion. The research onion. Any question about the onion? It's a beautiful onion. All right, so let's move on.
Hello, Prof.
Yes.
Prof, please, when you were talking, you emphasized the point that your choice of philosophy will give you an identity, whether you are a positivist thinker, a pragmatic thinker, among others. So please, I want to ask, could it be an enduring factor, or it could vary based on the research topic and the investigation? What I'm saying is that when Prof was talking,
yes, so the last part that we didn't hear, will it be what factor?
I was asking of your position in terms of philosophy will be a permanent factor, or it will vary depending on the research area that you are undertaking.
All right, so this question relates to research philosophy. That I said that as a researcher, you must know your philosophy. So will the philosophy be varying based on the research topic, or is just something that is what? Cast in stone? Two ways to look at it. For some disciplines, there are dominant philosophies. So for instance, in finance, the most dominant philosophy is positivism. Such that if you don't adopt that approach, you are actually seen not to be rigorous when it comes to conducting research. So sometimes your discipline defines your philosophy very largely. The second thing is that in some cases, it is the research question that determines the philosophy. Because, for instance, suppose that I have been given a contract by an organization to conduct a research, and they say that they want focus group discussions. They just want me to take stories and all that. I cannot use positivist approach for it, because is liaised with opinions, perceptions, which do not apply in the case of positivism. So in that case, I have to pursue, say, an interpretivist perspective. So 2 ways. Number one, sometimes the discipline background influences your philosophy. Then the second part is that in some cases, the research topic. Because you look at what is the best way of solving the research problem. And that will be an important influence when it comes to determining your philosophy. So that is how I will tackle the question. Okay. Yes.
If you did mention that it will seek an information from us right now, that can be given to that.
Yes.
So if, for instance, well-known decides to conduct special days, let's say in Ghana, or possibly another country, within the same country, and we consider that one.
Have they put the data together?
Just that they want to achieve, they want the same candidate, but possibly they want to compare the same thing between Ghana and then a certain country.
It's still cross-sectional. Okay, it's still cross-sectional. Because the time period is one. Okay, it's one. Okay. So unless you take Ghana several years, that country several years, put the data together, then it becomes longitudinal. Okay. So when we talk about research philosophy, we are looking at the development of knowledge and the nature of knowledge. What underpins the development of knowledge and what underpins the nature of knowledge? That is research philosophy. And for our discussion, we will deal with 4. So the 4th one, I'll talk about it. Major philosophical assumptions: ontology, epistemology, axiology or ethics, and then methodology. 4. So we'll go through each of them, and then you would have an understanding. Now, when we talk about ontology, we are talking about the nature of reality. How is reality determined? Okay. How does the researcher view reality? Does the researcher view reality as objective? In other words, whether it occurs to your mind that the reality exists or not, it exists. So, for instance, we can say in all certainty that this world exists. Can we say that? That this world exists. It's real. It's real. So I can go and touch it. Okay? Can touch it and feel it. There's a world here. Okay? Now, or that somebody can say that this world doesn't exist. And indeed, the person will walk through the world. Is it possible? Is it possible? So that person will tell you that the world doesn't exist. It is only created in your mind. But there's nothing like the world. It's how you see it. It's the lens that you are wearing. It's at your level that the world exists. But at my level, this world does not exist. So basically what we are saying is that from the ontological perspective, some believe that reality is objective. It's something that is tangible, something that is visible to all. So what you cannot see, what you cannot visualize, does not exist. Okay? Whilst others will say that reality is socially constructed. It can vary from person to person. What you see to be real, when I see it, is not real. So what you see as wall, I just see it as some vacuum that I can walk across. So you must determine your view of reality at the moment. Whether reality is socially constructed or reality is what? Objective. So we have two types of reality: subjective reality and then objective reality. Reality exists whether we acknowledge it or not. That's objective reality. Reality exists only when we perceive it. So it can vary from what? Person to what? Person. Okay. So that is what we call ontology. So then, as I mentioned, there are two types of ontology in this wheel. Where we have the objectivist ontology, where they say that social and natural reality exist independent. So what you see in your mind and what actually exists, they are independent. So whether your mind perceives it or not, it exists. Okay. Then reality is derived from human cognitive processes. So your mind can also create what? Reality. That's the subjective one. Okay. I'm happy that we have a reverend minister here. Okay. So one of the debates of history is whether God exists or not. In our part of the world, it's not so much of a problem. We basically unanimously agree that there is God. Okay. You agreeing that there is God means that you believe that God exists as an independent entity, regardless of whether man acknowledges his existence or not. Okay? Then the other group, for them, it depends on who you are, that you will say there's God or there's no God. So look at it. And when we even get into the debate regarding sexualization or sexuality, so LGBT, whatever, and plus, those things, you even get the understanding clearer. Because Those of us who are objectivists, we say that when you are born, you are either what? Male or what? Female. In some extreme cases, you have what? People falling between. Okay, so that is accepted. But those groups, they are saying that that's not how it happens. How it happens is that when you are giving birth, through your interactions and your experiences, you can choose whether to be what? Male or what? Female. And indeed, they say that that whole issue of what? Sexuality is fluid. In other words, you can move back and forth. Okay? If you are a man, at a certain point, if you feel like becoming what? A woman, then you can become. And vice versa. So then you will see that they have then become so aggressive in proposing their views and actually forcing down that view, the truth of developing countries, to the extent that a country like Ghana, which is very religious, is at a crossroads as to whether to really say that this thing should be banned or we should even legalize it, as some will say. We have Ghanaians. Some of them are even professors that are in support of that weird thing. Okay, so that should tell you people's views when it comes to the nature of reality. Okay? So this other group says that reality is socially constructed. Okay, so what seems real to you is not real to me, and that falls within the doctrine, the so-called doctrine of multiple truths. Okay, they will say that there's nothing like truth. There's no single truth. Okay, that is relative. Okay, so it falls within that debate. That truth is relative. Okay, so that as a researcher also, with the phenomenon that you are going to describe, what is your view about it? So if I'm working on financial market development and economic growth, what is my view of financial sector development? So I will say that financial sector development is a concept that is well known and established in the literature. And there is no controversy as to what financial development is all about. And we can quantify it and measure it and say that it is this quantity or this amount. Okay, the same as economic growth. I would say that economic growth is simply a growth in the gross domestic product of the country. It's something that we can measure, something we can calculate and determine its level. So for that matter, I will say that I am a positivist when it comes to this research approach. But somebody will say, no, I will tend to say that financial market development is a multifaceted concept that will be difficult to measure because it involves a huge number of stakeholders, processes, and systems that will be difficult to measure. So for that matter, what you call financial sector development is subject to interpretation. Okay. Then in terms of growth, the same person will say that growth as well can be interpreted from several perspectives. For some, growth is just simply an increase in income, while for others, growth is when you have what? Positive experiences when it comes to your health, when it comes to your food, your water, your electricity, social relations, your voice, being able to speak in public without being shut down or without feeling ashamed. So then there are multiple dimensions of what we call growth. And for that matter, in my view, it cannot be measured. For that matter, I take an interpretivist position. Each of them will be right because they have provided strong arguments in support of their philosophy. So that is how you are supposed to conceptualize your research topic, to clearly spell out your philosophical assumption when it comes to ontology. Okay, so that's just an illustrative example that I've given. Yes, please.
So, I think complete clarity.
Yes.
We are having, and I like your position as, being a positive. So it's not everything you want to admit. So somebody who is a subjectivist and propagating a research or some view that there is nothing like God. We are not doing this just for academic sake. We want to build a society and become better people. If we have people who are strong and standing, making this argument as learned people, what kind of world are we creating? Because
yes.
Of human rights. According to, somebody said according to me, but I mean, if it is clear, we need to encourage it.
So let me just stop you here. You see, the debate is stronger than how you are looking at it. Otherwise, we will not have more than half of the world are not belonging to most of the religions that we are talking about. Why? Because the debate is not as clear as you are saying it. It's because of some orientation, some background that you have. That's why you are saying so. Okay. So, and we thank God for Africans. There are several factors that have made it so favorable for us to be able to become very religious. Okay? So if you go to the advanced countries, for instance, the person does not need to pray before they will get breakfast. Okay? They don't need to pray to pass their exams. They don't need to pray to pay their school fees. They don't need to pray that the light will not go off. They don't need to pray that the tap will be running. In other words, everything is working to the extent that they don't see that there is another superpower who is controlling the allocation of resources, fortunes, and favors. So in such an environment, it is very difficult to kind of convince them that there is some other power, okay? Some other power. And you will see that much of science, pure science, actually is built on that rhetoric that there's no God and even creation. So all of us going through secondary school, what were we taught as to how the world was created? And even today, most of our children, the teachers, they still teach the children that man came from monkey. And I'm telling you, one of my daughters from school told me that the teacher said that man came from monkey in Ghana here. That's what we teach our children. If man is coming from monkey, then it means that God did not create man. And science actually then traces it back to say that the world was created out of what? A big bang. Understand? So pure scientific thinking, which we are following, is actually based on the premise that the universe is self-created, self-perpetuated, and then is self-existent. You understand? So it is not as clear-cut as you have put it, but as I said, within our environment in Africa, it's so easy for you to, believe in God. And most of us have our parents to thank. That by the time they give birth to you, they give birth to you in the religion. Or if they even didn't give birth to you in their religion, you are surrounded by people with like-minded ideas regarding how the world should be viewed and how God controls the world. So those things exist, and therefore it is really in Africa that you see even religion is growing, but in the other parts of the world, it's dying.
I've really seen some of your colleagues who were religious at the point they got to your face.
No, what I'm saying is because of some theories and books that they have read. Yeah, I appreciate what you are saying. I appreciate what you are saying. I don't disagree with you, but I'm telling you that it is quite more complex than how you are seeing it. We have, of course, we have different values, different motivations, and all that. And of course, if people want to do whatever they want to do, then they must hold on to something that makes them to believe that there's no God or there's nothing like wrong or right. Then they can do whatever they want to do. But if you want to subject yourself to some strict discipline of morality, code of good conduct and behavior, then you have to still stick to the theory and ontology of the existence of God. Yes.
Based on what they say, sorry to say this, mostly the West that actually believe in this. Are they not hiding behind ability, creative ability to manufacture a lot of things? That is actually putting them to that kind of belief that is our feeling, and that maybe try to play priority instead of fair living and then understanding other parts. Because why am I saying this? In their time, there are areas they see that when it is about techniques, they've done the investigation, then some to see that okay, that's why that it's unknown. That is, one can fairly believe that okay, that is not equality because maybe we don't have the ability to identify it. But doctors will tell you that we have done all this, but that part is what they are responsible. So if you are not going to carry a certain belief or a certain research, that is, I do see that too much direction research. The research that is meant for the purpose, that is their belief that they are imposing it. So they are hiding behind what they have the ability to do, because we don't have it. So that is how belief is. So what I'm trying to find out, do we have a measure? That is a standard measure. Yes, just why you are view about what you are doing. But there is a certain class that accepts it to be. So
that's what we are discussing. That's what we are discussing. The standards are what we are discussing, so that you follow an objectivist standard or a subjectivist standard. Yes, that's what we are discussing. Yes.
I'd like to find out, is it possible that maybe I am the objective,
Hmm.
but the sponsor of the research
Mm-hmm.
is subjective type.
Yes. You have to align your interests. Yes. You have to align your interests. Otherwise, you will not be selected for the research. That's it.
Kind of want to see if this can explain what my brother is saying. Let's say, right, we are in a situation, I need bread, and I can prepare bread and myself eat. And well, I need pastry, any other form of pastry. Then I will think I don't need a baker because I can do it here. And I'll find a way of convincing you to agree with me that once I can prepare my bread, I can prepare any other pastry. There is no need of who is a baker or a pastry somewhere who will do that. And I think it is not a matter of them hiding, whether they are hiding or not. That is what is exposed to them right here from the field. So it's allowed us to also take our stand just as they are taking it.
And the thing is that they have money and they are willing to spend the money to promote their beliefs. But we, those that are having the good values, we are not willing to spend our money. And when they say contribute money for us to build church or mosque, to be running away. Yes. They will have what? God's people, their kingdom is not of this world. You see? Their kingdom is not of this world. So they should not occupy their minds with worldly goods. Sure. Okay. Yes.
Or more than they have
You are thinking that they have this, they don't have the same mind. They don't have the same mind. That's why their perspectives are different. The same information, the same information that I'm giving you, you process it differently. Okay, so the cognitive processing of information will differ from person to person. So even if a sermon is preached, the members of the congregation are going to interpret the sermon differently. And in fact, there are people who even become very angry while others are smiling at the same message because they have processed the message and then they are now saying, he's insulting me. And then they get angry. Okay, so the processing is different. Okay, and that's how it is and determines who thinks what in that order. Okay? Then let's move to what we call epistemology. So let me say that once you determine your ontology, it will influence your epistemology. Okay? And epistemology is basically about the field of knowledge study. In other words, what is the best way to know? Okay? What is the best way to know something? What is the best way to acquire knowledge? So what is knowledge and what constitutes valid knowledge is at the heart of epistemology. So whilst ontology is concerned about the nature of reality, epistemology concerns itself with what? What constitutes what? Knowledge, or the nature of knowledge and how to know. Okay? So that how to know can also be divided into two, just like the nature of reality, which is ontology. Objectivist and then subjectivist. So we have subjectivist ontology and then objectivist ontology. So it flows in that manner. Okay? So on epistemology is simply a theory of knowledge. How do we know? What's the best way to know? Okay? So the objectivists, in terms of their epistemology, they believe in theory-neutral observational language. In other words, the researcher does not impose his theory on the research process. You allow things to speak for themselves. Allow knowledge to be studied from its natural environment. Do not bring on board external influences in the inquiry or knowledge generation process. So in other words, the researcher must separate him or herself, her views or perspective from the subjects of the research. So your views don't matter as a researcher. Okay? Your views don't matter. Let the subjects speak for themselves in their natural state. So then we say that the researcher is objectively accessing the external world. You are objectively accessing the external world. In other words, the world itself is not within you. Okay? So you are an independent player in the knowledge generation process. And that's what happens in science in the experimental process. So what the scientists will do is that you catch the insect, put it in what? A controlled environment. Let that insect evolve naturally. Don't influence it. Allow, and all you need to do is to collect data and observe what is happening. Don't add your views to the observation. Write what you see, not what you think. Okay, or what you perceive. Write what is actually happening to objectively access the external world. Okay, this is opposed to the subjectivist epistemology, and they believe that in this world that we are in, if we want to access it, then we cannot separate the researcher from the research process. We cannot separate the views of the researcher from the research. So in this case, the researcher is both a subject of the research and a participant of the research process. So your views are allowed to influence the research process. So they would believe that knowledge is socially and historically constructed, such that what was known 2,000 years ago may be gone by now. What we know today, we don't know that, we did not know that 10 years. So it is the interaction of human beings with the environment over time that is going to determine how knowledge is constructed. So for that matter, the researcher cannot isolate himself from the research process. So he has to subjectively access what? Knowledge from the external world. Okay, the external world. So two perspectives, subjectivists and what? Objectivists. Objectivists will believe that the knowledge process must be independently accessed from the external world. Whereas the subjectivists will believe that knowledge is socially and historically constructed. And for that matter, the researcher ought to dependently access knowledge from what? The external world. The researcher, it is impossible for the researcher to be objective. Okay. So what it means is that if at the ontology stage, you said that you were a subjectivist, when it comes to epistemology, you can't now say that you are what? At the other side, no. It has to be consistent. Otherwise, you'll be debating against yourself. So you have to be consistent when it comes to epistemology and what? The ontology. And that will also give rise to your methodology. I'll come to axiology. Your methodology. So ontology determines epistemology. Epistemology will determine methodology. Now, because you have said that you are objectivist when it comes to the ontology and epistemology, when it comes to the methodology, you must pursue a quantitative approach. You must pursue an approach that seeks to measure, an approach that seeks to calculate, an approach that seeks to determine clear facts and figures, an approach that is analytical and quantitative in nature. Now, if you say your approach in terms of ontology is subjectivist, and then the epistemology, you are also a subjectivist, then you must of necessity pursue a qualitative approach, whereby the data you are collecting are people's views, their perceptions, their attitudes, their behavioral traits, their histories, their stories, their narratives, things that you cannot quantify, but will be based on people's interpretation of the phenomenon. Okay, so in that case, you will be pursuing what? A qualitative approach. I'll come to the situation where you need to mix them. And that will come under the worldviews, pragmatism. Okay. And that gives birth to the axiology. Axiology is simply the role of values in research. What is the role of values in the research process? That is what we call axiology. Okay? So that as a researcher, you must lay bare your values. The objectivists believe that research is value neutral, whereas the subjectivists believe that research is value laden. In other words, research is not value free, it's full of values. People's perceptions, their attitudes, their orientations influence research. And for that matter, that forms the basis of the judgments they make when it comes to the research process. So that is what axiology is all about. So if you are an objectivist, you will say that research is value-free. If you are a subjectivist, you will say that research is value-laden or is full of values. And the values affect what? Interpretations. The values even determine your choice of data collection approaches and all that. Okay. And that moves us to the next part, which is about the paradigms. What we just discussed are the philosophical assumptions. The philosophical assumptions give rise to the research paradigms or research philosophies or research worldviews. So the philosophies are simply the beliefs that guide the actions of the researcher. Okay, so they constitute a belief system that influences and guides the actions of the researcher. Okay? So if you read Guba, he would usually call them paradigms or worldviews. The same as Creswell. Creswell will also use worldviews to describe the research paradigms that we are going to discuss. So according to Kuhn, one of the top scientists when it comes to philosophies, he says that paradigms are universally recognized scientific achievements that for a time provide model problems and solutions to a body of practitioners. Okay. So worldviews, paradigms, and all that. Four main paradigms: positivism, interpretivism, realism, pragmatism. We'll go through them one after the other, so that by the time we finish, you should tell where you stand. Okay? Positivism. So I did mention that that is where I stand in most cases as a researcher. If you read most of my papers, they will approach research from a positivist lens. So here, the researcher will employ empirical methods, make extensive use of quantitative analysis, or develop logical calculi to build formal explanatory theory. Okay? So, for instance, I can conduct a research to test the law of demand. What is the law of demand? The higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. So this is a positivist hypothesis. So I can just use that and come out with my topic: demand for maize in the northern region of Ghana. That's my topic. So if I'm going to approach this topic, then I need to go to the market or just interview people who have bought maize or who sell maize. Collect data. How much maize did you buy? What was the price? Okay, so I collect all the data: quantity of maize, the price of maize, and I fix that into my model, and I do my analysis to find out whether the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. So that would be a positivist approach. So it means that I am saying that what we call demand is a measurable concept. Price is a measurable concept. Quantity is a measurable concept. So for that matter, I will collect data on them. There's no controversy about them. Whether I, the researcher, I believe in price or I don't believe in price, when I go to the market, I will see whether I can get a commodity, I can get a bowl of maize without a price or money in my pocket. Okay? So that's the perspective I will then use to do my analysis. So I'll build my demand model. Okay, set out my hypothesis, collect my data, then I analyze it. If at the end of the day, I find out that indeed, as the price increases, the quantity demanded for maize decreases, then I say that I have confirmed the theory of demand in Tamale as it relates to maize. Full stop. If at the end of the day, I find out that it is the reverse, as price increases, the demand is also increased, then I'll say that Tamale seems to be behaving differently because it is behaving contrary to the law of demand. Okay? Because as the price increased, I saw that the quantity demanded increased, which is an unusual situation and runs counter to the law of demand. So I make that, and I seek to explain that, why it is so, how to justify that. Yes. Yes, the reason why the Tamale situation is different. I have to explain it. Okay. So I will still, because I'm a positivist, I will still use the positive approach. But the interpreter will say that no, go and interview the market women and listen to their stories. And they will tell you the reason that it is so. So in this case, I will then say, okay, let me do a mixed method research. Okay, so that's how come sometimes people do mixed method research, because they now want to explain deeper from the social perspectives and all that. Yes. So what are the key features? They believe in the real world, driven by natural laws and mechanisms, like the law of demand. Okay, so view things from value-free, context-free perspective. So the context doesn't matter. Cause-effect-based laws. Okay, higher the price, lower quantity demanded. Okay, empirical verifiability and falsification. Okay, so you try to verify, for instance, whether the law of demand is true. And to do that, you collect data and test it. That's the empirical process. So when we talk about empirical research, it means that you have collected data, or you have obtained data if it exists from secondary sources, and you do the analysis. Now, if you look at the literature on philosophy, one of the key issues that came up was falsification. And falsification is a hypothesis that gives conditions under which it is false. Okay? It's a hypothesis that reveals the condition or conditions under which the hypothesis is false. So for instance, if I say that the world will end tomorrow, I have given an implied way to test the falsifiability of this statement. How do you test it? If tomorrow arrives and then we move to the following day and the world has not ended, then my statement has been falsified. Okay, so those who believe in that school, they believe that the only valid way to pursue knowledge is knowledge that is set out in a falsification mechanism, such that there are a set of conditions that can be used to determine whether the statement is true or not. So positivists use mathematical models, econometric models, statistical models, and they emphasize on using the scientific method. We'll go through the scientific method possibly tomorrow. So that's what has dominated finance, economics, and to a large extent, accounting thought. even though more and more we are seeing more of the accountants moving towards interpretivism, realism, and all that. But the traditional leaning of accounting has been positivist perspective. Then we move to interpretivism. So in the scientific world, the dominant school of thought was positivism. But along the line, the positivist dimension was strongly challenged by a number of philosophers. And their arguments stem from where we began from, that we are living in a world of multiple realities, okay, whereby people see reality differently. So if people see reality differently, how then can we be able to quantify a single reality without acknowledging that reality exists in multiple forms? Okay. So interpretivist research is based on the meanings that people attach to norms, rules, and values that regulate their interaction. Because people give different meanings to different messages. Okay? So that gives rise to interpretation. Even when you take Holy Scriptures, there can be thousands of interpretations to one scripture. So what then is the scripture saying? So if you have been following social media, a lot of debates around different scriptures. This group will say, no, this one, that's not what the scripture is saying. This group will say, that's what it is saying. So they are giving multiple interpretations. So then, in interpretivism, the researcher takes due care so that he does not impose previous understandings, allow things to flow. In other words, be open to anything that comes up. In the quantitative approach, you already know what should come out, the law of demand. That's what should come out. If something contrary to that comes out, we have to investigate it further. But in the interpretivist view, be open to any new thing that will come. Okay? Be open to new norms, be open to new rules, be open to values that may be new. Okay? So the focus is not only on what they tell us directly about the reasons for their beliefs and actions, but also on the social practices that underlie them. Because if you are even a researcher, you see that sometimes you are interviewing somebody, and you, the researcher, you can tell that what they are telling you, that's not the truth. So you have to see beyond what the people are telling you. See beyond the actions. Look around. You can look around the neighborhood, because you can go to a house, and then when you ask them about their income, the amount that they will quote will be very small. But if you look around, what your eyes can see, it will tell you that it's more than what they are saying. So look at what you have seen and interpret. And that can bring out new insights in the research process. So they say that social practice gives meaning to social action. Okay? So in other words, what society agrees to be right is what is right. What society agrees to do is what is right. And what is right can change from time to time. At a particular point in time, human sacrifice was seen to be good. But at this point in time, if you talk about human sacrifice, there will be a lot of backlash about it. Okay? But hitherto, that was seen to be normal, and it was enforced. Okay? So social practice over time will give rise to social action. So what are the key characteristics of interpretivism or constructivism? They believe in a world of intangible multiple realities. Okay? Reality is multiple. We have your reality, my reality, and then their reality. It's the same thing they talk about proof. Your truth, my truth, and then there's the truth itself. Okay, that's their belief. Okay, that's not my belief. I believe in one truth, that the truth is one. Okay. The meaning of phenomena are placed in context. Okay, so you don't generalize, place it in context. Researcher is simultaneously the object and the subject. You play dual role as a researcher. Scientific knowledge is socially constructed and socially sustained. Okay? Investigates phenomena alongside ethical, cultural, political, and social issues. Okay? So you can't take out those non-quantifiable, or the reason why the economists will leave out those cultural and political and social issues with that, he can't measure them. He can't measure them. And they will say that what cannot be measured we should not bother ourselves with it. Okay? But the interpretivists will tell you that it is the views, the ethics, the values that determine the society proper. Okay? So they place less emphasis on hypothesis testing. You may not see them testing hypotheses. Then they believe in qualitative research methods. Okay? They don't believe in quantitative. That's the perspective of the interpretivists. Okay? Then realism. Realism, which is also an important school of thought. Okay? They believe that there are two groups under this. We have the realists and then the critical realists. Or you can call the realists direct realists. And then we have the critical realists. So the direct realists, they believe that reality exists independently of human thoughts. So whether you think about it or not, it exists. However, the critical realists, they believe that even though the reality may exist, but the reality may be masked from our eyes. In other words, there may be interferences that may cause you not to see the reality as what it is. And for that matter, that can distort your interpretation. Okay? So, for instance, what is on the board and the colors that are there, not all of us are seeing them the same way, because there are differences in the power of our eyesight. So what you see is dependent on the power of your eyesight. If you are sitting far, you can't see this. You can't see Saunders, Lewis, and Thornhill. You can't see, but it's there. So he can be there and be debating. It doesn't exist. But the reason is that there are some things, and one of them is the distance that is preventing him from seeing it. Okay? So the reality has to be interpreted through social conditions. So I should be able to sympathize with him, relate with him, and say that maybe something is, because you will have situation where you are trying to explain something to somebody and they are simply not getting it. They are not getting it. In other words, there is some block in terms of their perspective so that they cannot see it the way that you are seeing it. So that's what the critical realists are saying. So in terms of epistemology, they would say that reality is, or knowledge is created from observation, whereby we can collect credible data and facts. Okay? But then there may be insufficient data because of what? The inaccuracies in our perceptions. So if I wanted to say, write out everything that is on the board, somebody who is seated far will not see this one. So they will not write it. Okay? They will not write, they will write everything and leave out this one. Because they have been influenced by some sensations, which can be caused by distance. Sometimes it's caused by just perspective. Sometimes it's just indoctrination. Sometimes, like you were arguing, so they are indoctrinated. Okay, they have been schooled in a particular manner. So they cannot see things the way you see them. Okay. So they also believe in putting things in context. Okay. So in terms of belief, axiology, they believe research is full of values. Okay. They can choose to use quantitative or qualitative. Okay. Depending on whether they are direct realists, either the direct realist is likely to use quantitative, whereas the critical realists will usually use qualitative. Okay? So a realist can choose qualitative or quantitative approach. Then the last school of thought is pragmatism. And I usually find a lot of people falling within here. Because if you are not sure where you fall here. Because pragmatism, what they think is that they have no devotion to any philosophy. Their philosophy is that use the philosophy that best suits your research approach. In other words, focus on what works and not a devotion to philosophy or a particular philosophical perspective. So if at a point in time you think that you must take a positivist approach, take it. If another point in time you want to take an objectivist approach or an interpretivist approach, pursue it. Or if you have to go and use critical realism, pursue it. But by all
Hello, please, we can't hear anything. Hello, Prof. Hello, Prof.
Okay. Can you hear now?
Yes, yes, Prof. Yes.
Okay, okay. So we are now together. So main features, they are not committed to any philosophical system. Apply methods that suit problems. So identify the problem, use a method that suits it, and not methods that suit philosophy. So the method should suit problem, method should not suit philosophy. No. Okay. So they embrace both quantitative and qualitative research methods, depending on which one works best for them. Okay. And they can also use mixed methods. So this table summarizes the philosophies, the differences, and the similarities from ontology to epistemology to axiology to methodology.
Hello, Prof.
And
Still, I can't hear.
Yeah, hold on.
Okay.
can you hear now?
Yes, Prof.
All right, so I was saying that students should be able to distinguish between positivism and interpretivism in terms of ontology, epistemology, axiology, and methodology. So this table gives the key explanations to each of them in a distinct manner. So the first column talks about the philosophical assumption, as in ontology, epistemology, and all that. So if you then, the other columns provide for the worldviews. So when you move across from the ontology, it tells you the ontology of positivism vis-a-vis the ontology of realism, vis-a-vis the ontology of interpretivism, and then vis-a-vis the ontology of pragmatism, so that you can draw the differences very clearly. So this table is very critical when it comes to philosophical assumptions. Yes.
Just why this the government approach to the infrastructure. Can you attribute it to the experiences of both the possible and that of the
Yes, you can say that you are drawing on the strength of, say, this school, and then the strength of this other school, so that you can use it to overcome the weaknesses of the first school. So they are complementary. Okay? You can use them in a complementary manner, because each of them will have their weakness or weaknesses. Yes, you can do that.
So where you employ this method,
Yes.
before I used to use the method.
No. Because we said that if you are a critical realist or a realist, you can use both qualitative and quantitative. But of course, it is easier to say that you are a pragmatist when you are using mixed methods, because that's easy for you to justify. So you can do mixed methods, but that involves a lot of work, because it means you have to do qualitative and what? Quantitative. So because of this, I would prefer to be bold and say that I am a positivist and I will go at any length to defend my position. Another person will say that he is an interpretivist and he will go at all length to defend his or her position. Okay? But more and more, the advocacy is towards mixed method research, because we have identified that if you use one approach, you are likely to encounter some weaknesses. So you are better off using both, both quantitative and qualitative. But the problem is that if you are doing, for instance, finance research that cuts across, say, 18 countries, how are you going to do the qualitative interviews? Do you even have the visa to travel from one country? Even if you have the visa, do you have the money? If you have the money, do you have access to the people you want to go and interview? You can imagine going into a plane to Nigeria to interview somebody, only for them to refuse to be interviewed. What are you going to do? Are you going to sit under a tree and cook your own data and come back? So, in certain cases, some topics make it difficult and near impossible for you to do mixed method, because the resource requirements are very, very huge. So usually I do not necessarily bother my students that they should do mixed method. If you want to do mixed method, I'll welcome it. If you want to do mono method, I'll welcome it. Just make sure that you have a strong justification, that's all. And it's the justification process that we are going through at the moment. Okay? So let's finalize the lecture. So I talked about research approaches. We talked about deduction or deductive approach, induction or inductive approach, and then abduction. This is the first time you are hearing abduction in this class. Now, so when we talk about the deductive approach, then, as I did mention, the research process starts from theory generation or theory development through literature review. And then, based on that, you design your questionnaire, develop your research strategy, and then you test the theory. That's what we call deductive approach. In the inductive approach, the researcher may not necessarily have a theory. So you collect your data. And then when you explore the data, then you can use it to build theory. So the theory comes from the data. It's not the theory that derives the data, but the data derives what? The theory. Then the abduction approach. Here, the researcher starts with the induction approach, such that data is collected. collect the data, you examine patterns, themes in the data, and then you tease out the patterns and the themes to either modify a theory that already exists or create what? A new theory. And when you have created or modified the existing theory, you now go back and collect data again in order to confirm the theory of facts that you have generated. So we call that abduction. So some say that the abduction approach combines what? Induction with what? Deduction. But if you read through the literature, much of it will divide approaches into two: abduction and induction. Abduction and induction. Okay, so you can look at the differences between them. Then that should be all. Okay. Any question? So these are practice questions that you can go through to be sure that you are following the lecture. Okay? So you say you have decided to undertake a project and have defined the main research questions as: what are the opinions of consumers to a 10% reduction in weight, with the price remaining the same, of Snickers chocolate bars? Write a hypothesis that you will test in your project. This should be easy to cause you to think. So that's your topic. You follow hypothesis. Why may it be argued that the concept of the manager is socially constructed rather than real? So here is testing your knowledge in epistemology and what? Ontology. Okay. Why are the radical paradigms relevant in business and management research, given that most managers would say that the purpose of organizational investigation is to develop recommendations for action to solve problems without radical change? You have chosen to undertake your research project following the deductive approach. What factors may cause you to work inductively, although working deductively is your preferred choice? So, advantages and disadvantages of inductive approach and then deductive approach. Distinguish among positivism, interpretivism, realism, and pragmatism based on ontology, epistemology, axiology, and methodology. Yeah. Question 3 is asking you to indicate in very clear terms the importance of the main paradigms when it comes to business and management research, and then management practice. That's all that is. Okay. So I can ask you to discuss the relevance of positivism to contemporary management. Okay. So some of the questions you have to think and answer. Others, the answers are in the slides. So, but we often want you to think. So this is at the graduate level. It should not be 2 and 4. So we have to motivate you to think. Okay? Think and think deeply. All right. So I guess there's no question. So if there is no question, we can go for the snack break, and then you can continue with the other lectures. So God willing, we shall meet tomorrow. Yes.
Prof, are we supposed to work on this assignment and submit them?
Yes. Yes, please.
Okay, please. What is the word limit
The word limit for what?
for the assignment?
Which assignment? I have not given you assignment.
I thought the practice questions are for us to provide
Oh
responses.
no, they are not submittable.
Okay,
So
Prof.
it's for you to assess your knowledge in the topic.
Okay.
As you go through the slides and the textbooks, you should test yourself against those questions to be sure that you understand where we are going. Okay? The essence is that you go through the questions so that when you see them or similar ones in the exam, you will not say that I have not seen this before. That's the essence.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, it's